Welcome, dear students, to the final lecture of our course, Introduction to Psychology. We've come a long way in this journey of exploring the fascinating world of human behavior and the mind. In this last lecture, we will take some time to review some of the basics that we've covered throughout the course, particularly since the last quiz, to ensure that you're well prepared for the final quiz. So firstly, let's recall the topic of learning. We learned that learning is a process that occurs through experience and behavior change. We studied classical conditioning, where a neutral stimulus is paired with an unconditioned stimulus to create a conditioned response. We also learned about operant conditioning, where behavior is reinforced or punished to increase or decrease its frequency. It is essential to understand the principles of learning as they apply to all areas of psychology, from education through to behavior therapy. Next, we reviewed the power of the situation. We learned that situations can give significant influence to human behavior and can often override personal traits and personal values. We also studied the famous Milgram experiment, where ordinary people were willing to give potentially, theoretically, fatal electric shocks to a stranger when instructed to do so by an authority. We also learned about the Stanford prison experiment, where the participants quickly assumed the roles of prisoners and guards, showing how social situations can impact our behaviors. We then discussed the difference between mental health and mental illness. We learned that mental health is a state of well-being where an individual can realize their potential and cope with the daily stresses of life. In contrast, mental illness refers to a broad range of mental health conditions that impact a person's thinking, mood, and behavior. Mental illness can affect anyone, regardless of their age, their gender, or their background. And finally, we explored some types of psychological therapy. We studied the Freudian approach of psychoanalysis, where the therapist helps the client uncover unconscious conflicts in childhood experiences. We also discussed cognitive behavioral therapy, where the therapist helps the client change their negative thoughts and behaviors to improve their mental health. And lastly, we talked about humanistic psychotherapy, where the therapist creates a safe, non-judgmental environment for the client to explore their feelings and emotions. So, some other things that we've looked at and that I want to focus in on specifically. Intelligence quotient, or IQ. Now, if you recall, as you know, an IQ is a measure of a person's cognitive abilities, their general intelligence, including their reasoning, their problem solving, and abstract thinking. And in this review, we will go over some of the basics of the IQ and what it measures, so that you have this fresh in your mind for the final quiz. So firstly, it's important here to understand that the average IQ is 100 on this scale. And this means that half of the population scores below 100 and half of it scores above 100. The IQ test is standardized so that the average score remains at 100, and it has a standard deviation of 15 points. Now, the IQ test was originally developed by people like Alfred Binet back in the early 1900s to help identify students who needed extra assistance in school. And since then, it's been revised and expanded to become a widely used measure of intelligence. And the IQ test consists of several subtests that assess different cognitive abilities, such as verbal comprehension, working memory, and processing speed. And scores on each subset are combined to form an overall IQ score. Now, there are many different IQ tests available, such as the Stanford-Binet Intelligence Scale and the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. And each test has its own unique format and scoring system, but they all measure similar cognitive abilities. And it's important to note that IQ scores are not the only measure of intelligence, and they do not determine a person's worth or their intelligence or even their success in life. There are many factors that contribute to intelligence, like genetics and environment and life experiences. And IQ scores can be useful in certain contexts, such as identifying individuals who may benefit from extra assistance or from an enrichment program, but they should never be used to make sweeping generalizations or judgments about a person's abilities and potential. So in essence, the IQ is a measure of cognitive abilities that is standardized with an average score of 100. Be mindful of that for the quiz. Let's go on to language and the brain now. Now, one of the most fascinating aspects of language is that it is localized in the left hemisphere, if you recall from that lecture. Specifically, it is localized in the left temporal lobe, so above the ear, right around the ear area, above that. This discovery was made through the study of language disorders such as aphasia, which are often associated with damage in this area. Now, of course, we covered a large range of topics when we discussed language, like phonetics and syntax and semantics. Phonetics being the sounds of language, syntax being the rules that govern the structure of language. Overall, the psychology of language includes the study of how language is acquired and developed, which is crucial in human development. And language, remember, helps us to communicate with others, and that there's a critical time period for learning language in early childhood. Let's go on now and review the importance of ethical considerations in conducting psychological research. So with a particular focus here on the role of the Institutional Review Board, the IRB. Remember, psychological research has the potential to produce important insights into human behavior and mental processes, but it needs to be carried out responsibly in an ethical manner to ensure the dignity and safety and welfare of the research participants. So a key safeguard to ensuring the ethical conduct of research is the Institutional Review Board, or IRB. Remember, the IRB is a committee made up of individuals from a diverse background, including scientists, non-scientists, clergy, community members, ethicists, who are responsible for reviewing and approving research proposals before they are conducted. And so in order for a research to be carried out in a university setting that involves human participants or animals, there needs to be ethical approval from the IRB. And the role of the IRB is to ensure, first off, that there's informed consent of participants, that there's debriefing, that there's a protection of confidentiality, that there's a good reason for carrying out the research, that the research has a good risk-benefit analysis done for it, and that there is a right to withdraw from the study at any time for the participants. All of these things go into ensuring a good ethical study within research. Let's go on now and explore a little bit of stress and what we learned about stress. Stress, of course, is a normal part of life and can be defined as the body's response to a perceived threat or challenge. Now, while acute stress can be helpful in certain situations, chronic stress can lead to very significant negative health consequences. And the body's response to stress is coordinated by a complex system known as the HPA axis, which stands for the hypothalamic, pituitary adrenal axis. The HPA axis is a bit of a feedback loop between the hypothalamus, which is a small area in the brain, the pituitary gland, which is located at the base of the brain, and the adrenal gland, which is located on top of the kidneys. Now, when a stressor is perceived, the hypothalamus releases a hormone called CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone, which signals the pituitary gland to release ACTH, which is adrenocorticotropic hormone. And the ACTH then travels to the adrenal gland and signals them to release cortisol, a stress hormone. And cortisol increases blood sugar levels, suppresses the immune system, and affects metabolism and blood pressure. And if you recall, sustained high levels of cortisol can have significant effects upon damaging a person's nervous system as well as their behavioral functioning. So, overall, chronic activation of the HPA axis due to chronic stress can lead to negative health consequences such as increased risk of heart disease, depression, and anxiety. So it's important to manage stress through exercise, through meditation, through social supports, and to prevent chronic activation of the HPA axis. So that's the thing I want you to remember. The HPA axis is part of the body's response to stress, but we don't want it activated constantly because that can cause problems. Let's go on to the social situation. The power of the social situation is a fundamental concept of psychology, which refers to how the presence of or absence of others can impact an individual's behavior. So this concept has been studied extensively and has provided valuable insights into human behavior, particularly in understanding why people act in certain ways in group settings. Now, one of the famous examples of the power of this situation is the bystander effect, which is the phenomenon where individuals are less likely to intervene or help someone in need when others are present. So research has shown that the more people present in a situation, the less likely any one person is to take action, even if the situation is potentially dangerous or harmful to someone else. Now, we've discussed and demonstrated a classic case of this of Kitty Genovese, who was a woman who was attacked and murdered outside her apartment building while numerous neighbors watched from their windows but failed to intervene. It goes to show that you're more likely to gain help in a situation where there's only one bystander. So, then let's take a look also at the ego and the power of the ego. So, in Freudian theory, the human psyche is divided into three parts: the id, the ego, and the superego. If you recall the charioteer and the two wild horses, the id and the superego are the id is the wild horse, the superego is the noble horse, and the ego is the charioteer. So in this case, for your quiz, remember this: the ego is part of the psyche that develops a response to the external world. It serves as a mediator between your internal desires and the demands of reality. So it's the rational decision maker within you that helps you to navigate the social world. The ego is an important part of people because it helps us to be responsible in managing the tension between our conscience and our primitive desires, our drive for pleasure and our desire to be good. And so our ego is finding that balance of these opposing forces. Let's go on now and explore a little bit of mental illness and review that. Remember, mental illness refers to a range of psychological disorders that affect an individual's thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. And these disorders can impact a person's ability to function in daily life. It can cause distress to themselves or others. It can cause impairment or disability in ability to function, and tends to be rather rigid in its responses, and that's part of the problem. It's also important to be mindful that mental health and mental illness kind of can exist on a continuum, and we need to kind of remember where we are and where others are. But in order to be diagnosed with a specific mental illness, you need to meet specific criterion that are designed. But generally, it's important to recognize that, generally speaking, mental illness is not just having one bad day. It is having significant disruption and struggle and rigidity in functioning over a period of time that causes distress to yourself and others. Then we take a look at psychotherapies, and specifically I want you to kind of remember psychoanalysis, one of the very first forms of psychotherapy developed by Sigmund Freud. The goal with psychoanalysis is to reveal what is unconscious, to have a person explore their unconscious conflicts, their past experiences and repressed emotions in order to bring about change within a person. Remember as well that there are other types of psychotherapy, like humanistic psychotherapy, which is valuable for bringing self-awareness and self-improvement, and cognitive behavioral therapy, which focuses on the relationship between thoughts, emotions, and behavior, and overcoming negative thought patterns within life, and is particularly beneficial for anxiety and depression. So, those are just a few things that I want you to review and kind of have ready in your mind, some specific things to have ready in your mind for the final quiz. A reminder that we are ending with the final quiz, so before you finish this course, be sure to complete those 2 quizzes. They kind of count for your marks. So overall, dear students, as we come to the end of our Introduction to Psychology course, I want to take a moment and thank each and every one of you for your dedication and your hard work over the past period of time. It's been an absolute pleasure teaching and engaging with you. And throughout this course, we have explored a variety of topics and concepts on psychology, not being comprehensive, but we have looked at a lot of areas. We've looked at the basic structures of the brain and how they function in all their complexities in mental illness and psychotherapy. We've delved into the intricacies of human behavior, of learning, of cognition, of emotion, and social influence. And I hope that you've found this course to be enlightening and informative, and that you've gained a deeper understanding of and appreciation for the field of psychology. And I want to praise each one of you for your efforts and engagement throughout the course. Your participation and enthusiasm have truly made this a wonderful learning experience. And I am impressed by your insightful insights, the ways that you've engaged, and your willingness to take part in all of this learning process. You've demonstrated a deep curiosity and commitment to understanding the world around you simply by enrolling in this course. And I have no doubt that this passion will carry you forward in the rest of your life. Continue to learn. And as we wrap up this course, I want to remind you, again, complete that final quiz and do your best. Don't let it stress you out. Remember, we don't want to be stressed out. We don't want to live in chronic stress. Focus for a period of time. Review the points that I've highlighted in this lecture, and I'm sure that you will do quite well. I wish you all the best in your future endeavors as you continue to study psychology and continue to grow as a professional in social and community service work. And again, thank you for a wonderful course. It has been an absolute pleasure teaching you. and I wish you all the best. You take care. Goodbye.